Hi, everyone. I'm sorry I'm late getting here today. I've been having glitches with the video, and I still think there are glitches, but I just decided to go ahead and do it rather than keep all of us running late for it. I hate to do that. So I'm going to plunge ahead. Um, and so today's live event is called How to Master Writing Personal Narratives. So before I begin, I want to start with a quote. And this quote is by an author. Her name is Isak Dinesen, I think. I may not be pronouncing it right, but it's spelled Isak is I-S-A-K, and Dinesen is D-I-N-S-E-N. So if you know the correct pronunciation for that, I would love to hear on that, to hear about that. But I chose this quote because I think it really sums up the fact that just by being human, we're living life and we have stories. And just we go about our day even telling stories all the time. But when it comes to writing, that can be a little bit harder. Okay. So before we get too deep into this, I'd like it if you could just say hello in the chat and where you're from. Okay. All right. Let's see. Okay. So we're going to dive into this a little bit more. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Suzanne Davis. I'm an online academic writing tutor, and I help students with learning the writing skills they need for college, for graduate school, and for their professional lives. So I like to do these workshops just every week, just to kind of give you a little taste of how to improve your writing and different aspects of writing. All right, so in today's workshop about personal narratives, we're going to look at three things. First, I'm going to cover what is a personal narrative. Then we're going to look at finding a good topic for a personal narrative. And then we're going to cover how to write your personal narratives. All right, so let's get started with looking at what is a personal narrative. Now I'm going to share my screen with you, and hopefully, oh, no, that's not working. All right, well, I was afraid it wouldn't work, so I did print out slides, and I'm not sure how that will work, but I'm going to try it anyway, and we'll see. All right, so a personal narrative really is a story from your own life. It has a beginning, which is your characters, your settings, and then the middle is where you're building up action. And then there's the climax in that middle section of a personal narrative. And then there's the end, which is your basic resolution. And another aspect of a personal narrative, which is a little bit different than if you're just telling a story, is that it has significance to you in this story. So that's something you might include a little bit in a conclusion, or it might be something you hint at as you're telling the story. But a personal narrative does really give the reader a sense of what this story means to you. Okay. All right. So what I want to do next is to look at how to pick a story. So personal narratives are really shorter stories from your life. I think of it as picking one episode or one moment of your life. And this could be, for example, if you're traveling to another country and you've gotten lost in a city, then getting lost in a city would be a good example of a personal narrative. You would have a beginning, which would be the setting of where you were. You'd be in the middle, sort of how you got lost, what you did while you were lost, and then an ending where hopefully you're found and you're not still lost. But it has all of those elements to it. Whereas if you were to write about the whole travel experience you had, you'd be overwhelming people, and it wouldn't really have that story framework. It would be really a list of routines, but you wouldn't have a very definite beginning, middle, and end. So when you're looking for a topic, you want to pick something that has those small, significant moments or episodes. All right. So I'm sorry I couldn't share the screen with you. I'm still looking for maybe a way to do that. All right. But for this next part, I'm going to give you an idea of how to brainstorm for finding those stories in your life. And so I came up with some questions. All right. I'm trying to see if that can be seen. I'm not sure. Oh, I'm sorry. All right, I'm going to read the questions, and at the end of this, I'm going to post a link to the PowerPoint that I'm doing. I should know. I should know that things go wrong, but oh well. Let's look at the brainstorming questions. So what I like to do is to find really a quiet place, and I like to take about 15 minutes and look at some questions that help dig into my life, that I can say, oh, this is coming up and this is coming up. And then I have a wide variety of choices. So one of the first questions is, what are some significant stories from your life? And so you would think of the things that just kind of jump out in your mind, and you would start listing those. Another question is, when did you face a challenge or obstacle in your life? So this would really be a story about overcoming something. Or maybe you don't overcome that. That's still a story in that too. But you would really be looking for the challenges that you faced. And this is a great question, especially if you're thinking of writing a personal statement on an application for college or graduate school. They tend to like stories in which you're talking about overcoming an obstacle. And then another great question is just, what are some funny things that happened to you? Or what are some funny things you did? These can make great stories. And some of the best personal narratives I've read are funny narratives. And those are usually just very interesting and fun to write too. Okay. Another one is, what stories are your most important memories? So do you have a really important childhood memory, a memory from school, a memory from being a teenager, like being on your first date or your first kiss? What are some of those memories that stand out to you and have a really personal or important meaning in your life? And then the final question that I use for brainstorming is, what are some sad events? And what are some happy events from your life? And so these are the questions that I use to really get thinking about a personal narrative in my life. And like I said, I take about 15 minutes and I just start listing all of the ideas I can for these questions. And then when I have my ideas, I go back and I compare them to what I really need for a personal narrative. So I need to look at an idea that has a definite beginning, middle, and end. I also want to look at a story that has a lot of detail to it, and it's something I remember very vividly. And of course, the last thing when I choose a personal narrative topic is that it's interesting to me. I don't like to write things that aren't interesting to myself, and in personal narratives, it's just horrible to get stuck in something that you don't like. And then you've got to write a whole paper on it. And then if none of this works for you, if you can't find really good topics from brainstorming, just Google personal narrative writing prompts, because there are literally hundreds of personal narrative writing prompts online. And I'm going to give you a link to a blog post I wrote that has 11 of them. And so you can check that out. And writing prompts are great because they get you thinking of things quickly, and sometimes it's just easier when you have a little bit more guidance. And writing prompts do that for you. All right, so now you've got your ideas. So what would you do next in writing them? Well, there's really two ways you can approach this, and you want to do a little bit of planning. So one option is where you take the time, you list the different elements in your story, the different events, and then you take that and you start to see if you have a really good personal narrative story. The way I usually do it is I just take my topic and I just start writing, and I don't stop. It's called really the first draft, which is actually pretty much an ugly first draft for me. But it's just a great way to get everything out. And then there are certain characteristics that I look for or that I try to incorporate when I write my personal narrative. And the first thing that I really like to do is make sure that I'm showing the story. So this means not just what you see, but it means really giving an idea of the entire experience. And you do that through the 5 senses. So that's what you see, what you hear, what you touch, what you smell, what you taste. Now, not every personal narrative is going to have all 5 senses, and that's fine. But just look at where you can add sensory description into your personal narrative. I mean, if you're hiking, then I hope you're not writing about the way rocks taste. But you could really write about what you hear on the mountain. You could write about how the rock feels. You could write about seeing it, and possibly there are things that you're smelling, flowers or plants, those types of things. So think about what are the different aspects of the experience that you remember, and how can you describe that through the senses. Another thing that I like to incorporate in a personal narrative is dialogue. So if there's more than one person in this story, if there's somebody other than you, try and add a little bit of dialogue that's funny or interesting. And that kind of just, it makes it seem more like a story when you have dialogue. And that gives just a little bit more interest. The trick with dialogue is not to have too much of it. Because when we have too much dialogue, it feels like we're telling what happens. We're telling the actions instead of showing them. So you want a good balance there. And I do that really by just taking little pieces of my story where I've had a little bit of conversation and just kind of paring it down to really just a few things that are well said, that are funny or maybe profound. And that's how I do that. And of course, you want to convey emotions. Obviously, during a story, you had feelings. And if you're interacting with other people, they had emotions, they had feelings. So add that to your personal narrative. And finally, there's an optional technique that I use, and I use this quite a bit in my personal narratives. And it's a technique called in medias res. That's a Latin phrase, and it means in the midst of or in the middle of. And so this is where you would start your story not at the beginning, but really in the middle of what happens. So this would be really the climax of your story. And what's great about this is that you're immediately diving into an action, and that grabs somebody's attention. So you dive into that action for just a little bit, and then you flash back to the beginning and tell the story all the way up to the end. And that's just, it's a great technique. You see that in a lot of books. You see it in a lot of short stories. And it's really great to do if you want to impress your readers. It's especially great for when you write personal statements on applications, because the admissions counselors and the people reading your writing, well, they read a lot of personal statements, and it makes yours stand out really well. And that's what you ultimately want in your personal narratives. You want them to stand out. But you also want to kind of just finish off with indicating to your reader what the significance of that story is. So what's the meaning of it? Why is it meaningful to you, that story? And this might be, if you're writing an essay, you could include in the conclusion a realization you came to at the end of the story. Or it might be something that you want to just hint at throughout the story. But a lot of times in essays, you would put the realization in your conclusion, where you're leaving off. And those are really some of the main components that you need in a personal narrative. There's a few other things that you can do, but if you follow those core things, you'll have a really great personal narrative. Okay, so do you have any questions about personal narratives? Okay, let's see. Oh, I see Kara, you're there. The old show, don't tell. Yes, that's it. Telling the 5 senses. Yes, that's the showing. And when you have dialogues, the way in which you have dialogue is not too much of it, because you don't want to wind up telling the action. That's really good. Kara, do you have any ideas for what you want to write? Oh, no. Oh. Well, Kara, I hope you find some afterwards. And you can check out my blog post there to get at least 11 writing prompts to help you. All right. So do you have any questions about personal narratives before we leave? All right. I think we're good. So if this video has been helpful, please like it and please share it online. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. All right. Bye, everyone. Bye, Kara. Cheers.